I was 20 when my cousin Leo invited a few of us to spend a long weekend at his grandfather's old cabin. It sat on a huge stretch of land outside a small town called Maple Hollow in northern Arkansas. The place hadn't been used much since his grandfather passed, and Leo said it would be fun for all of us to hang out, relax, and get away from school stress. This was in the summer of 2004, when we still thought we were invincible and nothing bad could ever happen to us. There were 4 of us in total. Me, Leo, our buddy Chris, and another friend named Jonah. We packed up our cars with snacks, sleeping bags, and enough soda and cheap beer to last a week. The drive to the cabin was peaceful, the kind of road where the forest presses right up against the gravel and you lose cell signal long before you reach your destination. When we got there, the cabin looked exactly like the sort of place where you would either have the best weekend of your life or the last weekend of your life. The wood was old and dark, the windows dusty, and the whole structure seemed just a little too quiet, like it had been waiting for someone. Still, it felt exciting in a way only a creepy vacation spot can. We spent the first afternoon cleaning, sweeping out spiders, and airing out the bedrooms. By the time we finished, the sun was hanging low and the woods were getting darker by the minute. We made a simple dinner and built a fire outside. We sat around it joking, telling stupid stories, and making fun of each other the way cousins and friends do when they're too comfortable for their own good. Later that night, when most of the fire had burned down to glowing coals, I heard something shuffling just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought it was a deer, but the sound was too slow, too steady, almost like someone trying not to be heard. I stood up and walked closer to the dying fire, letting my eyes adjust. That was when I noticed a shape standing just past the last bit of orange light. It wasn't moving. It wasn't making any sound at all. It was just standing there, like it was waiting for me to take another step. I felt this cold pressure in my chest, like the air around me had suddenly turned heavier. I tried to blink the shape into something normal, like a stump or a tree, but it wasn't a tree. It was taller than a normal person and narrow, like someone who hadn't eaten in weeks. I couldn't make out its face, only the outline of a head and shoulders. I would have stared longer, but Leo called my name from behind, asking why the door was open. His voice snapped me out of whatever spell I was under. When I turned back, the figure was gone. Just darkness and trees. I tried telling him I saw someone standing out there, but he just laughed and said I was tired. I pretended to agree, but all night I kept replaying the shape in my mind. It didn't feel like something my imagination made up. It felt solid, real. The next day we tried to act normal. We fished in a nearby pond, played cards, and hiked down some overgrown trails. But for me, the woods felt different, thicker, noisy in places where nothing should have been moving. Twice I heard twigs snapping behind me, but every time I turned, no one was there. That evening we gathered around the fire again. I kept checking the trees, expecting to see that shape standing in the same spot as before. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling of being watched followed me everywhere. Later that night, when I stepped away from the fire to use the bathroom, something snapped loudly just a few feet from me. Not a little snap, but the sound of a thick branch breaking under weight. I froze. The air felt colder, even though it was July. I backed away slowly, not wanting to turn my back, and then I ran for the fire as fast as I could. The guys laughed when they saw my face, but I couldn't even pretend it was funny. Something had been right there, close enough for me to hear its breathing, or maybe I only imagined the breathing. I told myself I imagined it. That was easier. Not long after that, while Leo was talking about some ridiculous story from high school, I noticed something over his shoulder. A man stood behind him, close enough he could have reached out and touched Leo's hair. The man didn't look like he belonged out there. His beard was wild and tangled. His clothes were dirty, almost torn. His eyes, though, were the worst part. They were wide and empty, staring straight at the back of Leo's head, like he wasn't looking at a person at all. More like he was looking at a target. I couldn't breathe, couldn't yell, couldn't even blink. My whole body locked up like someone had poured ice water through my veins. Then the stranger slowly turned his head toward me. His expression didn't change. No emotion. No curiosity. Nothing. He just stared at me for a long, horrible moment before walking back into the darkness without a sound. When I finally snapped out of it and tried to tell the guys, they thought I was trying to scare them. I kept insisting it was real, but nobody believed me. Not then. 2 days passed with no sign of the man. I started wondering if maybe I really had imagined him. But then came the morning we went looking for wild hogs. That was the day everything truly went wrong. We were walking down an old dirt road when we heard grunting up ahead. 3 big hogs were digging in the mud. Chris and Jonah raised their rifles, trying to be quiet, but before anyone could shoot, a gun went off somewhere in the trees. The bullet hit a branch right above Leo's head, exploding bark everywhere. For a second, none of us moved. Then another shot hit even closer. Someone was shooting at us. We ran through the woods, following a side trail back to the cabin. No more shots came at first, but as soon as the cabin came into view, the gunfire started again. The bullets hit the walls and the ground, close enough to feel the shock. We didn't grab anything. We didn't look back. We just dove into my car and sped toward town, hoping the shooter wasn't following us. The police came later. They searched the property for a week. They found old campsites, footprints, and strangely, my missing sleeping bag and blanket, but never the man himself. They said he probably moved on. I never believed that. Years passed. The cabin was eventually abandoned again. The woods grew back over the trails. And that strange man, whoever he was never caught. Sometimes I talk to Leo on the phone, and we joke about what might have happened to that man. But when I'm alone, the jokes stop. I start thinking about the way he stared at Leo that night, like he picked him out for a reason. And the part that keeps me up sometimes is this. What if he didn't leave the woods at all? What if he's still there, waiting for a night when the fire burns low and someone steps too close to the trees? I want to tell you a story my cousin Eli shared with me, one that still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He says it happened in the summer of 1998, back when he and his 2 best friends, Marco and Lena, spent most of their free time wandering around the outskirts of their town, Pine Hollow. I wasn't there when it happened, but after hearing the whole thing, I'm honestly glad I missed it. You have to picture Pine Hollow the way it looked back then. It wasn't anything fancy. Just a quiet little place surrounded by miles of uneven fields and thick, messy woods. Most families didn't have much money, so the kids made their own fun. For Eli and his friends, that meant hiking through the woods, poking around old sheds, and inventing stories about ghosts or creatures hiding in the trees. It was all harmless stuff until the day everything changed. That afternoon, Eli almost joined them. They had shown up at his house, excited and out of breath, begging him to come explore a new area of the woods they hadn't checked out before. But Eli had a shift at the small grocery store in town and couldn't get out of it. He told them to go without him. He even joked that they'd better find something cool so he could hear about it later. He didn't expect their something cool to become something he'd wish they had never found. Earlier that summer, a new highway had opened just outside Pine Hollow. Across from it stretched acres of tall grass, broken fences, and lonely farmland that nobody had touched in years. The 3 of them crossed the fields anyway, stomping through the dry weeds while insects buzzed around their ankles. After a while, the land dipped into a thick patch of woods that looked darker than the rest. The branches bent low, almost as if they were trying to block the entrance. They pushed through, laughing at the spiders and swatting at the mosquitoes, until they spotted something strange hiding between the trees. An old barn. It didn't look like it belonged there. The boards were gray and warped, the roof sagged to one side, and the big sliding door hung crooked on its track. The whole place had a sour, moldy smell, like something inside had been sitting for way too long. Marco suggested checking it out. Lena didn't want to, but she didn't want to look scared either, so she followed the boys to the doorway. The inside of the barn was dim, with sunlight leaking in through tiny cracks. Dust floated in the air like drifting snowflakes. For a second, nothing seemed strange, just old tools and broken crates scattered everywhere. Then they turned the corner, At first, they didn't understand what they were seeing. They told Eli later that their brains just refused to make sense of it. Something long and dark was hanging from one of the roof beams. It swung slightly, even though there was no wind. Marco thought it was a dummy or a Halloween decoration someone had left there. That was the only thing that made sense. But when they stepped a little closer, the smell hit them. A thick, rotten smell that made their stomachs twist. Lena said it felt like the air got heavier, like she couldn't breathe, right? They got close enough to see the truth. It was a man. A real man. And he had been dead for a long time. His face was swollen and strange-looking, almost like it belonged to someone else. His clothes were stiff and stained. His boots dangled a few inches above the ground. And his skin. Lena said it looked stretched, like it was trying to slide off his bones. His eyes weren't eyes anymore, just dark holes that felt like they were staring straight through them. All three of them froze. They didn't scream. They couldn't. Something about the barn felt wrong, like they weren't supposed to be there, like the man wasn't alone. Marco swore later that he heard something shuffle in the corner behind him. He didn't look. He just grabbed Lena's arm and ran. They all bolted out of the barn, crashing through branches, tripping over roots, gasping for air, but too scared to stop. They didn't talk until they reached the edge of the field again, and even then, none of them knew what to say. They made their way to the Pine Hollow truck stop, the same place the man had abandoned his vehicle months earlier. Workers there remembered the missing trucker, but had no idea he had walked into the woods and never come out. Marco used the payphone to call the police. His hands shook so hard, he kept hitting the wrong buttons. When the officers arrived, they didn't let the kids go back with them, but the adults came back looking pale and angry, like they wished the kid's story hadn't been true. Eli found out the next day. They told him everything, but the part that really stayed with him wasn't just the body. It was how much it changed them afterward. Lena started having nightmares. Marco stopped going outside unless he had to. And Eli said the last time he talked to them years later, they both seemed distant, quieter, like a part of them never left that barn in the woods. Eli still wonders what would have happened if he had gone with them that day. Sometimes he thinks about the empty doorway of that barn and how something in the shadows might have been watching his friends. And sometimes he wonders if whatever was in there was hoping one more kid would walk through the trees and see something they shouldn't. Whenever he tells the story, he always ends it the same way. I don't know what they woke up in that barn, he says, but some places don't want to be found. And that one felt like it wanted to stay hidden for a reason. And honestly, after hearing all of it, I believe him. I really do. I always tell people that back in 2012, when I was trying to survive my first year of business school, I worked nights delivering food for a small pizza shop in the town of Briar Hills. The place was old, the ovens were loud, and the pay was nothing special, but it kept my bills from swallowing me whole. I had delivered pizzas before, back when I was 19 and going to community college, so taking the job again felt familiar. People love to say delivery drivers have it easy, but anyone who's done the job knows the truth. You hear stories. Drivers getting robbed, drivers getting chased by dogs, drivers finding things in the dark they should never have seen. Somehow, I lucked out for years. No robberies, no fights, not even a sketchy argument. I always figured maybe I carried myself with the confidence of someone broke enough to be dangerous. But one night changed how I saw everything. It was late fall, the kind of night where the air feels colder than it should, like winter is hiding just out of sight. We were winding down at the shop when an order came in for an address none of us recognized. The new kid, Marco, squinted at it and joked that maybe it was typed in wrong. I checked the map on the wall. Nothing. I checked my phone's GPS. Still nothing. The street name didn't even appear as a future road. It was like the place didn't exist. But we had no delivery zones, so I had to take it. The address was listed on Willow Creek Road, which ended abruptly near the edge of an empty stretch of land. According to the order, the house should have been 10 blocks past that dead end. That didn't make sense, but I decided to try anyway. I pulled out of the parking lot, drove past the quiet neighborhoods, and turned onto Willow Creek Road, right where the road normally stopped, There was now a fresh, smooth stretch of pavement. I stared at it for a second. I had driven that road hundreds of times and had never seen any construction equipment, traffic cones, or even a mention of an expansion. But now a completely new road stretched out in front of me, like someone had painted it onto the ground overnight. The farther I drove, the stranger it felt. No houses, no streetlights, no mailboxes, just empty land, quiet and dark, and the yellow lines on the asphalt glowing in my headlights. I didn't pass another car. The whole place felt like a space that wasn't supposed to exist yet. After nearly 10 minutes, a house appeared at the end of the road. One single house sitting all by itself, hunched like an old man trying to stay warm. The siding was peeling, the windows sagged, and the porch leaned forward as if it were tired of holding itself up. The place looked at least 60 years old, maybe older. What struck me first was the front door. It stood wide open behind a torn screen door that creaked in the wind. No lights, no cars, no movement. It didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look lived in either. It looked like something waiting. I parked, grabbed the pizza, and tried to convince myself that everything was fine. Not every weird house is dangerous, I reminded myself. Some people just have strange taste. I walked up the porch steps, which groaned under my weight. I knocked on the screen door. Nothing. I knocked again. This time, I saw someone move in the kitchen. A woman, maybe in her 20s, drifting from one side of the room to the other, like she was trying to remember where she had put something. I couldn't see her clearly, just her shape in the dim light. A soft voice called out, "Come in." She didn't move toward the door. She didn't even look at me. She just said it like she'd been expecting me. I stepped just inside the foyer. The air felt colder in there, thick and still, like the house was holding its breath. I waited, expecting her to come to the doorway with the money. Instead, from somewhere deeper inside, I heard a man whisper, "Tell him to come to the kitchen." His voice was quiet, but in the silent house, it sounded close. Too close. Something in my chest tightened. Every instinct I had started screaming at once. The woman didn't react to his whisper at all, which somehow made it even worse. She kept walking in slow circles in the same corner of the kitchen, like a looping video that kept restarting. I didn't wait. I turned around and got out of that house as fast as I could move. I sprinted to my car, dropped the pizza on the passenger seat, and peeled out of the driveway so hard gravel scattered behind me. I didn't slow down until I hit the familiar part of Willow Creek Road, the old part, the part that had been there my whole life. When I burst back into the restaurant, I must have looked pale enough to worry anyone. My manager, Jenna, listened quietly while I told her everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't question it. She just called the police and told me to sit down before I passed out. A few hours later, an officer called me. He said they went to the address, but no one was there. The house looked abandoned, maybe for years. But inside they found footprints in the dust. A few old food containers. A blanket on the floor. Someone had been there recently, but whoever it was had vanished. Then he told me something that made my skin crawl. The new section of Willow Creek Road wasn't officially open. Construction had only finished 2 weeks earlier, and the state hadn't made any announcements yet. According to the officer, the land had belonged to a man who refused to sell for decades. After he passed away, his son finally sold the property, and the state built the new road as fast as possible. But here's the thing. The house was scheduled to be knocked down the following week. No one was supposed to be living there. No utilities, no address in the system, no reason for anyone to be inside, and definitely no reason for anyone to know a delivery driver would show up there. 2 days later, while taking a shortcut across town, I drove past the spot and saw bulldozers tearing the house apart. Watching the roof collapse felt like a weight sliding off my shoulders. Whatever had been in that house was gone now. After that night, I never walked into another customer's home. I never delivered to a place I didn't recognize. And every now and then, when a strange order pops up for an address that doesn't show on the map, I get this cold feeling in my spine, like someone out there is still waiting for another driver to come into the kitchen. If you want, I can tell you the other creepy thing that happened during my delivery years. It wasn't as intense as this one, but trust me, it was still the kind of story that keeps your bedroom light on. In the summer of 1997, I stayed with my aunt and uncle in a tiny mountain town called Pine Hollow, the kind of place where the closest movie theater was an hour away, and the main road rolled up early every evening. My parents were traveling for work that year, so I spent June and July with family. The person I hung around the most was Eli, my older second cousin. He was 16, I was 13, and I followed him everywhere because he always seemed to know the best places to explore. Pine Hollow had woods that went on forever. Pine needles carpeted the ground so thickly that our footsteps barely made a sound. Some days we wandered just to see what weird stuff we could find. Old barns, broken fence posts, rusty tractors swallowed by vines. But the strangest thing we ever found happened on a day when we didn't plan to find anything at all. We were cutting through a part of the forest we didn't usually visit when we spotted something through the trees. At first, it looked like a patch of sky sitting on the ground, a glowing blue shape between the trunks. When we got closer, we saw it was a lake. A huge, perfectly still lake that neither of us had ever heard about. It didn't even look real. The water was so clear you could see straight through it, like glass, and the fish swimming inside were enormous. Some of them had shadows bigger than dogs. We asked my aunt and uncle that night if they knew about a lake deep in the woods, but they just frowned and told us no lake existed out there. They said maybe we had wandered too far or confused a creek for a pond. But we knew what we saw, and we knew it wasn't just some puddle. Over the next few weeks, we kept going back. Every visit gave us more fish than the last. It felt like the lake didn't want anything from us. It only wanted to be left alone. Still, the fish were too tempting, and we were too curious. By the end of July, we decided we had enough for a huge family fish fry and planned one final morning trip. We left before sunrise. The woods felt different that day, quiet in a heavy way, like the trees were holding their breath. Even the birds didn't start singing when the sky got lighter. When we reached the lake at dawn, the surface was so smooth it looked like a sheet of polished stone. No ripples, no breeze. No movement except the slow, shadowy shapes far below. We fished for hours and filled 2 buckets to the top. I was ready to head back because the sun was getting hot and the hike home took a while. But Eli said he wanted to swim first. I told him I couldn't swim and didn't want to get in anyway. Something about that lake always gave me a weird feeling, like it was listening to us. He just laughed and said I worried too much. Near the water's edge, a long branch hung from an old pine tree with a thick rope tied around it. The rope was gray and stiff, like it had been there 50 years, maybe longer. It didn't look safe to hold a person's weight, but Eli shrugged off my concerns. He tossed his shirt beside me, climbed the tree just high enough to grab the rope, and gave me a grin like he was about to do something impressive. He pushed off. For a second, everything looked fine. Then the rope snapped with a soft cracking sound. Not loud, not sharp, more like something sighing as it gave up. He fell into the deep part of the lake with a flat, heavy splash. The sound wasn't like normal water. It echoed strangely, almost hollow, like the lake swallowed it. I waited for him to come up, ready to tease him for not listening to me. But nothing happened. The water stayed smooth. A small ring of ripples drifted outward and faded. I watched the surface, waiting for his head to break through. 10 seconds passed, then 20, then 30. "Eli?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. I stepped into the water, even though I was scared to death of it. With every step, the bottom kicked up clouds of silt until the lake turned murky and brown around my legs. I couldn't see anything. It felt like the lake wanted to keep its secrets. My chest tightened. I backed away and scanned the whole shoreline. There was no sign of him. No bubbles, no movement. Just water, flat and peaceful, like it had swallowed him without a sound. The walk back to Pine Hollow was the longest of my life. Every crunch of twigs under my feet made me jump. Every shadow looked like him. I kept waiting for Eli to appear behind a tree, laughing because he had somehow played the world's cruelest joke, but he never showed. By the time I reached my aunt and uncle's house, I could barely speak. All I got out was Eli, the lake, before I broke down. When they realized what I meant, my uncle grabbed his keys and we rushed back. But the lake looked the same as before, quiet, empty, almost pleased with itself. The sheriff brought a search team the next morning. I wasn't there when they dragged the water, but my aunt told me later what they found. Eli's foot had gotten stuck under a long, half-rotted branch sitting on the lake bed. The divers said it must have reached up like a crooked hand. That's the phrase they used. A crooked hand. That image still haunts me. The lake remained off limits after that, but sometimes at night I thought I heard water moving in the woods, even though the nearest river was miles away. And every now and then, I dreamed about the lake. In the dream, I stand at the edge and see someone under the water, just below the surface. Their face is pale, their hand is reaching up, their eyes are wide and pleading. And when I wake up, I always feel like something in the dream wasn't a dream at all. Something from that lake followed me home. I learned to swim the next summer, just in case I ever needed to save someone. But truthfully, deep down, I know the truth. What happened to Eli had nothing to do with swimming. It had to do with that lake in the middle of nowhere. That quiet place that didn't show up on any map. And sometimes I wonder if the lake is still out there, waiting for the next person who finds it by accident. Waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to get close. Because I swear, as strange as it sounds, that lake felt alive. And I don't think it has finished eating. You know, I always thought weird stuff only happened in movies, or to people who go looking for trouble. I never imagined something like this would happen to me, especially not last summer, in 2023, on what felt like the hottest day in the history of the planet. My cousin Lily and I were supposed to meet some hobby dog breeders out near the tiny town of Pine Hollow. She swore they raised the friendliest puppies on earth. I had been driving my ancient 2004 sedan, which rattled when I turned too fast and overheated any time the sun looked directly at it. It was almost noon. The heat was brutal, and the car decided it had had enough. Steam puffed up from under the hood, like the thing was about to give its final goodbye. I pulled over on a back road so empty it felt like we had fallen off the map. I grabbed my phone to text Lily and tell her I might be late, but of course my battery was dead. Completely, totally dead. Just my luck. I sat there for a moment, sweating through my shirt, hoping someone might randomly drive by. No one did, so I told myself the only option was to start walking. If I wanted help, I had to find it. After a few minutes of trudging down the boiling pavement, I spotted something in the distance. At first I thought it was a mirage, but it didn't fade. It was an old farmhouse, leaning slightly to one side like it was tired of standing. The roof was patchy. The porch sagged. The whole place looked like it had been forgotten by time. Normally, the walk would have taken half an hour, but the heat felt like it was squeezing the air out of my lungs. I stopped several times just to breathe. There weren't even birds around, just the buzzing of cicadas that sounded weirdly too loud, like they were warning me to turn around. When I finally reached the property, I realized the yard wasn't really a yard at all. It looked like a graveyard for cars. Rusted doors, broken headlights, cracked bumpers, and random metal scraps littered the grass. It was like someone had taken a car apart, piece by piece, and never bothered to pick anything up. The deeper I walked, the harder it was to ignore how silent everything felt. Even the cicadas seemed to keep their distance. I reached the front door and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. The place felt empty, but not the kind of empty you get when someone's out running errands. It was the kind that made the hair on your arms rise. I walked around the side of the house, peeking into the windows. Through the kitchen window, I spotted an old beige landline phone hanging on the wall. A wave of relief hit me. A working phone meant I could call Lily and maybe even a tow truck. I called out, "Hello? Anyone home?" My voice sounded strange in the still air. When no one answered, I started circling the house again, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone. That's when I saw her. Through one of the back windows, in a small bedroom, a woman lay on a bed. For a second, I thought she was asleep. Her hands were folded neatly on her stomach, and she stared straight up at the ceiling. I almost tapped on the window to get her attention, but something about the whole thing felt off. So I went back to the front door, pulled a page from the notepad I kept in my backpack, and wrote a quick explanation. Car broke down. Need to use your phone. Not trying to scare you. I turned the doorknob. It opened with a slow, drawn-out creak that made me cringe. I stepped inside and immediately smelled something strange. Not rot exactly, but something dry and stale, like old paper mixed with dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. "Hello?" I called again, walking toward the bedroom. My voice echoed a little, which shouldn't happen in a small house, but somehow it did. The closer I got to the woman, the more wrong everything felt. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. Her skin looked dried out, like parchment. Her hair was pitch black, unnaturally dark, as if someone had painted it on her scalp. She didn't turn her head even when I stepped right beside her. I held out my note. Her hand didn't move. Not even a twitch. A cold, uncomfortable feeling settled deep in my stomach. I leaned in a bit to look at her face. Her eyes had a glossy shine, not the normal wet look, but the kind of shine you see on plastic. It reminded me of dolls, the ones that stare no matter where you stand. Still, some unreasonable part of me hoped she was just deeply asleep, or maybe sick. I reached out and touched the back of her hand. It was dry and cold. Not cold like she had been in a room with the AC blasting. Cold like she had been lying there for a long, long time. Right as I registered that, something behind me creaked. A long, slow, bending floorboard kind of creak, the kind that tells you someone else is in the house. I didn't look. I didn't think. I just ran. Out the door, down the steps, through the maze of car parts, and straight back toward the road. After about half a mile, a rusty blue pickup rolled up beside me. The driver, an older man with sunburnt skin and a flat expression, leaned out and asked if I needed help. I climbed in, but every muscle in my body was tense. When he tried making small talk, I barely answered. Something about him made me feel watched, like he was studying my face too closely. He let me use his phone to call Lily. She drove out to get me, and the relief I felt when I got into her car was so strong I almost cried. Only once we drove away did I tell her everything. Her eyes went wide, and she kept glancing at me like she wasn't sure if I was joking. I called the police. They said they would send someone to check the place. 3 days passed, no call. When I finally reached an officer who knew what I was talking about, he told me they found nothing strange. No body, no woman, nothing that fit my description. I hung up with chills running down my spine. Someone had been in that house with me. Someone who moved quietly enough to make the floor creak only once. Someone who had time to hide a body before the police arrived. More than once I've thought about going back with a camera, just to prove to myself that what I saw was real. But every time I imagine stepping into that house again, I picture those glossy eyes staring up at the ceiling, waiting. And I picture the sound of that creak behind me. Sometimes at night, when it's quiet, I swear I hear it again. A slow, careful step somewhere in the dark. And I know if the nightmares keep getting worse, I might end up back at that house, whether I want to or not. I still remember the summer of 2021, the year I agreed to help my old childhood friend Marla with a catalog photo shoot. We hadn't seen each other in years, so when she asked if I could come out to Hollow Creek, Oregon, to take photos for our new outdoor clothing line, I said yes without thinking twice. I figured it would be an easy job, a good chance to catch up, and maybe even a nice little vacation. When I landed, One of the company drivers took me up a narrow mountain road to a remote lodge tucked between tall, dark pines. The place looked friendly enough at first, but it had that strange quiet you only hear in spots where nature feels a little too close, like it's listening. Marla came out to greet me as soon as we arrived. She looked tired but excited to see me. Alongside her was her assistant, Lena, a shy girl who kept glancing at the tree line like she expected something to come walking out at any moment. I chalked it up to nerves. We talked for a bit, caught up on old stories, and then I went to my room. It was already getting dark, and the woods had this weird hum to them, like the wind was dragging its feet across the branches. The next morning, we met with the team for breakfast. There were about 15 of us all together. Everyone tried to make small talk, but the whole place felt tense. People kept glancing at the windows, even though nothing was out there except fog and trees. You know that feeling when a room is too quiet, like something heavy is pressing down on everyone? That was the atmosphere at that table. After we ate, the three of us climbed into an old green SUV to scout locations, and the models followed in another car. We drove for almost 2 hours through twisting mountain roads. The farther we went, the stranger everything felt. The radio kept picking up static, even though we weren't listening to anything. The trees looked bent in odd directions, like they were leaning away from something deeper in the forest. Eventually, we found a rocky cliff with perfect lighting. The chute went smoothly, surprisingly so. No odd noises, no strange shadows, nothing. But just as we wrapped up, Marla asked if I'd be willing to check out another spot she found earlier that morning. She said she had wandered off before I arrived and came across a lookout point with an unbelievable view. She insisted it was close, just 5 minutes up the road. She sounded excited, almost too excited, like she needed to show me this place. We left the others and drove out to the trailhead. The moment I stepped out of the SUV, the hairs on my arms stood up. The air felt wrong, heavy and cold, even though it was still August. The trees were silent again. No birds, no bugs, nothing. Just the crunch of our boots on the path. Marla led us down a narrow trail that ended at a sharp cliff. The view really was incredible, but not in a peaceful way. It felt like the world just dropped off into this yawning, empty space that didn't want us there. A thin mist drifted along the rocks, even though the sun was out. I mentioned that the light wasn't right for photos, but Marla stepped closer to the edge, like she didn't hear me. She kept inching forward, staring down at something I couldn't see. Her whole body seemed pulled toward the cliff, almost like someone was whispering to her from below. I called out for her to stop, but she ignored me. One more step, and the rock under her foot crumbled. She slipped, arms flailing, and then she was gone. The sound she made as she fell was something I'll never forget. It wasn't a scream. It was more like a sharp gasp, as if the air had been sucked out of her mouth. Lena cried out and bolted toward the cliff. If I hadn't grabbed her, she would have gone right over with Marla. She was shaking, insisting she saw something move at the bottom, something crawling near where Marla had landed. I told her she was in shock, but the look in her eyes terrified me. She wasn't lying. She believed what she saw. I had Lena hold on to me while I eased forward enough to look over the drop. The cliff face was almost vertical, the rocks jagged and sharp. About 70 feet down, Marla lay curled awkwardly on a ledge. At first she didn't move at all, and my stomach twisted. I thought she was gone. But then her fingers twitched, just barely, and her legs shifted. She was alive. I told Lena to run back to the SUV and call for help. She sprinted off, and a minute later I heard the engine roar to life. I kept calling down to Marla, telling her help was coming. The wind carried my voice strangely, stretching the sound like it didn't want it to reach her. The weight felt endless. The forest grew colder around me, and I kept hearing faint tapping noises from somewhere down the cliff. Light scraping sounds, like something shifting against stone. Every time I leaned over to look, the noise stopped. When the rescue team finally arrived, they moved fast. 2 men went down with ropes and a stretcher. When they reached Marla, she finally let out a weak groan. Up close, she looked broken in a way I didn't know a person could survive. Bruises, twisted limbs, blood matted in her hair. As they lifted her to the top, Lena clung to my arm. She kept whispering, "Something pushed her. I swear something pushed her." I didn't know what to say. I didn't see anything push her, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone on that trail. They took Marla away in an ambulance, and the shoot was canceled immediately. I went home the next day, but the woods stuck with me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way the trees leaned, the way the mist moved, and the strange tapping coming from below the cliff. Months later, Marla finally called me. Her voice sounded tired but steady. She told me she spent weeks in a coma because of swelling in her brain. She broke so many bones, the doctors stopped counting. She said the weirdest part was the dream she had while she was unconscious. She told me she kept dreaming of voices calling her deeper into the forest, telling her she didn't fall far enough. She laughed when she said it, trying to make a joke, but the sound didn't feel like a real laugh. It felt like something behind her was listening. When we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about that ledge, that mist, the scraping sounds, and the way the forest had pressed in around us. Sometimes I still hear that tapping noise in my sleep, and every time it sounds a little closer. This happened back in 2011, long before life settled into anything calm or predictable. At the time, my older brother Kevin was always traveling for work. He was on the road more than he was home, which meant I was usually alone with my son, Evan, in our quiet little house outside Pine Hollow, a tiny town surrounded by thick woods and long, winding back roads. A couple years earlier, Kevin and I had inherited a piece of land from our aunt. It was beautiful, but far from everything, and the 5-mile stretch leading to the house was barely a road. It was more like a narrow trail covered in loose gravel that slid under your tires if you so much as breathed wrong. When storms rolled in, that road could turn into something straight out of a nightmare. One evening, right after picking up Evan from school, a heavy storm slammed into Pine Hollow. The sky went from gray to pitch black in what felt like seconds. Rain hammered the windshield so hard, it looked like the glass might crack. I could barely see the road at all. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my hands hurt, trying to keep the car steady. But it didn't matter how careful I was. The gravel shifted, the tires skidded, and before I even realized what was happening, the car slid sideways and dropped into a ditch. The whole thing was so sudden I felt my stomach drop like I was on a roller coaster. Luckily, I remembered that Kevin had signed us up for roadside assistance a while back. I called them, hoping they weren't too busy. They told me the storm had caused a ton of accidents, but they would send someone as soon as they could. That was the best they could offer. So I tried to make Evan comfortable. He was only 7 and already scared, clutching his little backpack like it could shield him from the dark outside. The rain eased up after a few minutes, turning into a soft hiss instead of a roar. With the storm calming down, I could see a little farther down the road. We were still at least 2 miles from home. I thought about walking, but the idea of leaving the car in the middle of nowhere didn't feel right. And besides, something about the woods in that stormy half-light made my skin crawl. About 10 minutes later, I spotted headlights coming toward us. My heart jumped with relief. Finally. Help, except it wasn't a tow truck. It was a rust-colored pickup, the kind that looked old enough to fall apart if you slammed the door too hard. The driver slowed down as he passed us. I saw his face for only a second, but something about it made me shiver. He didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't even look confused. He just stared. His eyes were wide and unblinking, like he was trying to memorize our faces. Then he drove on without stopping. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he didn't know how to help. Maybe he was in a hurry, but something felt off. 5 minutes later, The same truck came back from the opposite direction. This time, he was driving even slower. He didn't roll his window down. He didn't ask if we were okay. He just stared at us again, his head turning slightly as he passed, like he didn't want to miss a single detail. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. Even Evan whispered, "Mom." That guy was weird. I told him not to worry, though the truth was, I felt anything but calm. By the time the truck appeared a third time, night had settled in completely. The woods around us were pitch black, and the only light came from the faint glow of the dashboard. When his headlights swept over us again, I felt cold all over. He passed us slowly, very slowly. Then he braked. The truck stopped just ahead of us. I held my breath. Then he pulled into a sharp three-point turn until the truck was facing us. He didn't get out. He didn't honk. He didn't do anything except sit there, staring straight at us from the darkness. I could feel his eyes on me, even from inside the car. It's hard to explain, but it felt like someone pressing their fingertips into the back of my skull. Evan squeezed my arm so tight, his small nails dug into my skin. Finally, after what felt like forever, the man opened his door. He stepped 1 foot out onto the wet gravel. At that exact moment, another pair of headlights appeared behind us. The man froze. He stared at the oncoming lights for a few seconds. Then he quickly slid back into his truck, slammed the door, spun the wheel around, and sped off into the darkness like a scared animal. Only when the new vehicle drew closer did I realize it was the actual tow truck. I cannot describe the relief I felt. I nearly cried when the driver stepped out and said, "You the one who called?" He pulled my car out in minutes and followed me back toward Pine Hollow to make sure we made it safely. All the while, I kept checking the road behind us, expecting that rusty truck to appear again. Even pulling into our driveway, I half expected to see it hiding behind the trees. Thankfully, we made it home without seeing it again. When Kevin came back from another work trip, I told him about sliding into the ditch, but I didn't mention the man. I didn't want him worrying about us when he was already stretched thin. Still, he went out and bought me a reliable SUV with 4-wheel drive. I didn't argue. For a long time, I tried to forget the whole thing. Life got busy again. Evan grew older. The county eventually paved the road, making it safer. The memory faded. But last month, while walking out of the grocery store, I saw a truck just like that rusty pickup parked near the edge of the lot. It wasn't the same one, but something about the shape, the color, the way it sat slightly crooked. It all came rushing back, hitting me so hard I had to stop walking for a moment. And that's when I realized something. If that tow truck hadn't shown up at that exact second, right when the man stepped out, right when he finally decided to approach us, I don't think he was planning on helping. Not at all. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and Evan is asleep down the hall, I find myself looking out the window toward the tree line. Even though I know it's impossible, some part of me still expects to see a pair of headlights waiting there, pointed straight at the house. Like he never finished what he started.